Yeah, so now we move on from Toronto over to the sea to UK, and now back over to Canada again. So again, we'll introduce who we are, the background and goals to the Ottawa project, look at the design, the data and content, then look at some of the map outputs of the actual wayfinding design and the final design and implementation, and David's going to be running through those. Then I'll come back and talk a little bit about the visitor map that we've developed from this, and David will talk about the future, and hopefully have a minute for Q&A. If anybody has anything on the last three talks, then I'm happy to answer at the end. So I'm sure everybody knows who I am already. David, would you like to introduce yourself, and then you can carry on with the presentation?
Sure, yeah, thank you, Claire. So my name is David Kopulos, and I'm a principal consultant with STEER and a wayfinding specialist, and I was the project manager for this Ottawa Wayfinding and Mapping initiative. So yeah, just to give you some background, our client for this project was Ottawa Tourism, who years and years ago identified a need for a more coherent visitor experience. And the way to do that, they felt, was by unifying the way that information was provided to visitors. And in parallel with this visitor-focused initiative, the City of Ottawa and the National Capital Commission, which is responsible for planning many of the public realm areas in the capital, were really seeking to realize the health and social and economic benefits for residents that have been demonstrated in other cities by these Legible City wayfinding projects. But thankfully, we know that pedestrian wayfinding strategies can do both those things. They can promote the use of active transportation and public transit by providing trustworthy and relevant information for planning and making walking journeys, while also creating a highly visible and coherent face and voice for the destination, in this case, the City of Ottawa. So our role as STEER was to really take the strategy from concept through detailed design to completion. And our starting point was this exemplar concept that you're seeing on screen now of a family of signs and a wayfinding map that was designed by another studio up to the conceptual level. So it represented a culmination of years of thought and design, but there was still a great deal of work that needed to be done to arrive at the final outputs. This map swatch, for instance, is a manual hand illustration and not based on data and not really scalable or updatable with new inputs. So that's where we came in. And we really started by asking the client what might be missing from this map, what could be removed or improved. So on the next slide.
My fault.
Oops.
There we go.
Perfect. So some areas that were ripe for improvement were, for instance, the treatment of LRT stations. That's on the left there, which showed a notional label, but not the actual locations of entrances, which can be up to a block apart, which is important if you're a pedestrian looking for the entrance. To take another example, bus stops were included, but the volatility of this data set, you can imagine bus stops are moved around quite frequently, really doesn't line up with the planned update cycle for the maps. So the client couldn't commit to keeping these maps accurate, so it's not appropriate to display that kind of data. Similarly, if you look on the right there was an interesting proposal for showing accessible routes, detours around steps. But that was a manual process of illustrating that really doesn't scale up across the whole map coverage area. So we looked at whether there are other ways to display that kind of information. So really the first challenge here before we dug into the map concept was to take a step back and consider the whole system's design. Ottawa really has a special place in the nation's consciousness, and its built form is been guided by ideas and standards and conventions that we really needed to respect. The wayfinding system, the mapping style, it all needed to reflect both the city's ceremonial side, embodied by the limestone and the copper, Parliament Chateau Laurier, you can picture it, as well as the more contemporary look of a modern, tech-focused growing city. So since this system would be located in both these town and crown environments, the design really had to feel at home in both. So to begin, we started developing a color scheme that reflected this dual identity with colors drawn from heritage and cultural sources that still resonated with a contemporary urban center. And the font also was chosen with a similar rationale in mind. We wanted something that felt federal but also fun at the same time. So the selected typeface was one that's also open source, so that maintaining the system by different parties is made easier. So in terms of the data available to us, because we had to rebuild the entire base map based on what was out there, we had access to most of the inputs we needed, but the coverage wasn't always what we needed. Since this map was going to show areas in both Ottawa and across the river in Gatineau, which is Quebec, we needed to achieve a comparable level of detail in both areas. So we couldn't add features in one area, like tree coverage that you see on the top right here, that we couldn't also source for the other jurisdiction. Excuse me. The next big challenge here was to bring clarity to this map, which is, after all, intended to make the city more legible and not the opposite. The list of destinations that had to be included within a relatively small geographic area was in the hundreds, as you can see here. So clearly something had to give. And so to bring some clarity to that, we established a 5-level hierarchy, and we led a very long workshop with the client to apply it to the list that you just saw. So the most distinctive landmarks, you can picture Parliament Hill, obviously. Some of the major museums were shown most prominently with illustrations and icons, whereas less significant destinations were progressively de-emphasized, but still shown. The next interesting challenge here, the final piece of the puzzle, was how to incorporate French. Ottawa, as I'm sure you'll know, is nothing if not studiously bilingual, and the client made it clear that both official languages should be treated equally in every regard, so not one being more prominent or larger or any of that. It was really our job to ensure that this didn't add any clutter to the system, so we looked at strategies like using double hinged road names, as you see on the bottom right there, and combining English and French where we could, as in the Chateau Laurier example. So there were two cartographic outcomes of this project, an overview map and a focus map. The overview map that you see here, or at least a crop of it, supports orientation by placing the user in the broader context of the city. The scale is 1 to 10,000, and it displays an area equivalent to about a 15-minute walk from your location in the middle of the map at an average walking speed, really inviting exploration beyond your immediate vicinity. Now you may be wondering why the map crop is in a circular frame like that, and we just couldn't resist basing it on these bronze tactile pedestal maps which were installed throughout the city. I mean, these are fantastic, so we just couldn't resist. The second map outcome is the focus map, and that's really the key wayfinding asset for this system and displays the full depth of content. It's a 1 to 2500 scale, and it really allows enough detail to show features in the public realm that are of interest to walking, so sidewalks, steps, things of that nature. And it displays an area of about 5 to 10 minute walk to really encourage people to explore on foot. Here you can see the different treatment of the same area on the two mapping styles, and really how the DNA that's shared between them links them as part of the same system. So here you can see the final design of where these maps live. The maps are heads-up rotated on a large monolith sign, a smaller mini-lith, and the maps really are the core of the system because they are the source of truth for the directional messages that appear on the finger posts and elsewhere. So one outcome of this process was a prototype sign. So what you see now, this isn't a render, this is a real sign in the ground that was installed in December to test the design in real-world conditions. So could the materials be fabricated and installed as we designed it? Did the map content and the styles feel appropriate and at the right scale and contrast level in context? So it was exciting both for us and for the client to see a real-world outcome of this project after just 8 months of design development, and that they had been working on paper for many years. Here you can see a detail of how the area around Parliament Hill was represented in a heads up, so I guess that would be south up orientation. And it was around this time when the prototype sign was installed that the client began to think about how the system could be a key aspect of their COVID tourism recovery plans. Static wayfinding signs like this are actually a very COVID-safe way of providing visitor information, given that they're outdoors and they don't involve touch like a digital system would. And so Ottawa Tourism really saw wayfinding as a way to visibly demonstrate the city's commitment to welcoming back visitors, which would in turn support an economic recovery for their members, the shops and visitor attractions that have been so hard hit. So to that end, they also asked us to develop that wayfinding base map into a paper handout visitor map that Claire is going to speak about now.
Sure. Hi. So I was on maternity leave last year when it was all developed, and I came back to this wonderful project and this amazing map and had to start putting our new design wayfinding stamp on it. So this is the existing visitor map that was in existence. It was the hotel concierges used it mainly as a tear-off map to provide to the visitors that came to stay. Also the tourist information centres use it. It has hotel locations on it and the key attractions, and a regional map on the reverse for access to the wider area. It had a different orientation between the two maps, so this was something, one of the key things that we wanted to change. So taking the new wayfinding style map that obviously David's just talked all about, we actually took the new centerline data from OpenStreetMap and created a dark base map to match the new wayfinding design. It was distinctive, but pretty unusable for marking up by a concierge as what we needed. And this was our first step at kind of going, right, okay, we've got this brand new style. How can we get this integrated and worked into a paper product? So we rotated the map around to 32 degrees to get the street grid aligned to help navigation and to allow the user to relate them to each other. So we rotated the regional map round, so north is 32 degrees off as well. We really like this map crop for downtown, this sort of square area, which is quite similar to the map before. It's zoomed in a little bit more actually. But could the region change? We weren't sort of sold on this crop, and we also needed to look then at a lighter colour base because this clearly we didn't think was going to work. So this was a wider option for the regional map, had a wider crop. We were able to zoom in a bit more, maximise the map area on the plan. We liked the listing layout at the bottom. It's sort of in more manageable chunks with that really long hotel listing. But we actually ended up having to cut off one of the key attractions at the top, and we thought about having an inset map and things like that. And in the end, we were like, no, actually, I think we're just going to have to go back to having the listing on the right hand side, zoom out a little bit. It's a regional map. There's actually plenty of space for it. So we stuck at 1 to 100,000 scale, included all the attractions here. We had all the key attractions shown as building illustrations. Public transit was added. They didn't have the routes on there before, so we added that to promote connectivity. And some lovely textures added to the surrounding rural areas. Also, we had inclusion of the heritage text, recognising the traditional territories and inhabitants of the Ottawa region. And this was the final visited downtown map on the main side. So this is at a scale of 1 to 14,000, has the key attractions as per the wayfinding signage. Additional facilities like toilets and neighbourhood activity zones were added to help users navigate the area and find the key areas. And we had the Confederation Boulevard was included, but not as prominent as the wayfinding map, and the bright multi-use path was consistent with the wayfinding map to encourage active travel along the canal and riverway. And so to the future. Is David still on the line?
Oh yeah, pardon me.
That's okay.
Yeah, so the future for both the wayfinding signage as well as the visitor map, the client is looking at a process of evaluating the prototype, so we're under no illusions that where we arrived is the final word in terms of accessibility, in terms of representation of Indigenous landmarks and voices on the map itself, which is obviously a key consideration in a place like Ottawa. But at the same time, the city is keen to move ahead with a wider rollout. So they're looking at some areas now, and also the potential to bring this beyond. So Claire mentioned in terms of the other projects, how really the greatest value is in applying the same map asset to other applications, and the city is looking at whether that would make sense here as well. So in transit stations, for cycling, for other uses, the more you can maintain that consistency, the better the user experience and efficiencies you can get as a result. So thank you.
Brilliant. Look at that. 59 slides in 48 minutes. There you go.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well done. Great presentation. I really enjoyed it. I love your mapping style. Beautiful work. So Roger Weed from UNBC is asking, is there a long waiting list for steer of places like Kingsbridge and Ottawa needing map attention?
Yeah, so I'm working in the UK with our manufacturers at contacting quite a few the sort of smaller towns, maybe. A lot of the bigger cities, like obviously Legible London, we work with TfL, Transport for London, on the Legible London projects as well, and places like Birmingham, Manchester, Bath, large cities have got a lot of wayfinding in place already, but it really is thinking now about the smaller one, where it's not, when a tourist turns up in these places and it's not obvious where the things are, where the key attractions are, putting some wayfinding in to try and help boost the economy in that area and get visitors to stay longer is a really beneficial thing for those smaller towns. I don't know about in Canada.
I think in North America it's taken, in Canada and North America, it's taken cities and larger towns a while to wake up to the potential there. So, you know, I have a long wish list of places that I think needs this kind of attention, but these ideas spread and cities start waking up to see what the potential is once they see the benefits of a city like Toronto that pushes ahead with it and follows through.
Yeah, I mean, the London one's been in place about 15 years, I think, now, getting on for. Early 2000s. So that, you know, and that was the key one in the UK, the first one in the UK, and it's spread across. And so obviously walking is not, you know, it's not going, it's getting more popular and more encouraging, and especially with on the COVID side of it and getting people outside. So it's definitely something that is slowly spreading and getting more popular, hopefully. And further internationally as well. I know there's been some Legible City trials in Hong Kong, for example, using the Legible London base. But yeah, quite a few opportunities, hopefully.
Yeah, you can be sure that I'm going to travel as much as I can after COVID. Glenn Brown from U of T saying, federal and fun. I was stuck on that for a bit, but you did it. I caught that too. Federal and fun, what does that mean?
It's well, I mean, that's the challenge. I mean, you don't want to be too formal, because it's you know, people are there on vacation. They're there to enjoy themselves. So you need to meet people where they are.
Absolutely. All right, so thank you both, especially Claire, for about 15 minutes of presentations. All very interesting. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Oh, we may have a question. Does Ottawa have any plans to install a digitalized map, add in sound features to enhance accessibility for those who are blind?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and one that's come up in a number of places where we've done similar work. And in the case of Ottawa, they've investigated it, and they are aware of both what the benefits could be in terms of accessibility, like you mentioned, and also the challenges to putting digital signage out in the environment to deliver something that stands up to minus 25, 30, whatever it gets to in Ottawa, and is still usable, is always a challenge. So it's a question of, is a digital, literal digital sign the best way to provide that, or can you provide that same level of accessibility through other tools? So whether that's a digital tool or an app or something similar.